Okay, so this is a food web, and it is just showing you basically what is eating what. So this green algae down here is what's called a producer. I guess I should read this before we continue. These are the trophic levels of a food chain in Ontario at the United States-Canada border. Energy and nutrients flow from the photosynthetic green algae at the base of the to the top of the chain, the Chinook salmon. So these food webs can kind of be thought about as being about energy in a certain way, and we'll talk about why. But the original energy in this system comes from producers. These things are also called autotrophs, or photoautotrophs if you want to be more specific. Photo meaning they get their energy from the sun, auto meaning they make it themselves, troph referring to these trophic levels. So green algae, plants, these are producers. These are autotrophs. The things that eat those producers are called primary consumers. They're primary consumers because they're like first on the list here, okay? Those are the things that eat plants. These are our herbivores, all right? Primary consumers are our herbivores. In this system, the slimy sculpin is our secondary consumer. The secondary consumer is the thing that eats the primary consumer, okay? Secondary consumers are carnivorous, and they're eating things that eat plants. In this system, the tertiary consumer, which is the Chinook salmon, is the thing that eats the secondary consumer, okay? So this all started with our producer. Producers are eaten by primary consumers. Producers are eaten by herbivores. Those primary consumers are then eaten by secondary consumers, which are carnivores. Those secondary consumers are eaten by your apex consumers, your tertiary consumers, also carnivores. So when I said that these were kind of about energy, I wanted to show you this diagram. This is an energy content in kilocalories per meter squared per year. Don't worry about the units on this, but what I wanted to show you is that you have your producers. Water lettuce, arrowhead, eelgrass, plants basically, or in the oceans it's going to be planktons and stuff, but these are things that are making energy from the sun. This bar goes all the way up. Okay? No energy, or no, I won't say no energy, but the way it's depicted here, no energy is lost, but very little energy is lost for primary consumers. Or, I'm sorry, for producers. No energy is lost for these producers. But then when they get eaten by primary consumers, notice that a bunch of this energy is gone. A bunch of this energy is gone. And where did it go? Well, a lot of that energy went to metabolism. It went to these producers performing what's called respiration, or converting sugar into energy. Some of it becomes undigestible, or something that the primary consumers cannot use. So, for us, that would be like fiber. You eat it, and then it just comes right back out of the system. You don't actually get to utilize any of the energy that's in that fiber. Then when these primary consumers get eaten by secondary consumers, there's even less energy available. And so on. So when those things get eaten by our tertiary, our apex consumers, there is even less energy available. And so what winds up happening in these systems is you wind up having far fewer apex predators than you do secondary consumers, primary consumers, or even producers. Because the energy levels drop. The amount of energy in the system drops at each phase of this food chain. If any of you are physics people, or if you've taken physics, this can be thought of in terms of the second law of thermodynamics. Every time you change energy levels, anytime you try to transform energy, you increase the amount of entropy in the universe. Or every time you go from one energy form to another, every time you go from, you take a plant and you eat it to make energy, you're going to lose some of that energy. And it says here, each trophic level has less energy available, and usually but not always supports the smaller massive organisms at the next level. So the next idea is the idea of a food web. And food webs are important because sometimes you can't get a sense of all of an organism's roles within a food chain, because food chains are linear, right? But food webs, more than one thing can eat something, and more than one thing can be eaten by something else. Because in reality, it's not always a linear system. So that might not have made sense, but let me explain how to read a food web, and then we're going to talk about food webs. So let's put a food item up here. And the way that food webs work is whatever eats that food item has an arrow pointing from the item to whatever eats it. So we'll just go ahead and throw an arrow right here. So according to this food web so far, I am consuming whatever this is because the arrow is pointing from that to me. Let's throw on some other of my favorite food items. And you can see here, I am drinking the cream soda. I'm eating the cheese. I'm drinking the coffee, okay? Wherever there is an arrow pointing, that is the thing that is eating it. Okay, so I'm eating cheese, I'm drinking coffee, I'm drinking cream soda. All right, those are the things I'm eating in this food web. But eventually, I am going to die, and I am going to decompose. And so often you'll see arrows pointing down to the decomposer. So in this food web, I'm eating all of these things, and then I'm getting eaten by these decomposers. This isn't a great food web because actually all of these products that I'm eating are made by other organisms. But I'm just showing you this is how you read these things. So let's look at an actual food web here. This is figure 20.6 in the textbook. And sometimes, so you see if we look at the base, we're going to go above the decomposers. But if you look here, you'll see that all of these things are eating the plants. Sometimes you'll see like a little sun that has an arrow going to the plants because the plants use that for energy. You don't have that here, and that's fine. But you see at this first level of our food web, we have our primary consumers. These things are eating the plants. Then at the next level, you have your secondary consumers, which eat the things that eat the plants. Then you have your secondary consumers and your apex consumers. But what I wanted to show you here is that, these things aren't linear like it is displayed in a food chain. Food chains are useful certainly for understanding how ecosystems work, but the reality is it's much more complicated than just that. Okay? And you'll also notice on this one, at the end of the day, it does not matter which level of the food chain or the food web you are on. You are always, all of these things are going to be eaten ultimately by the decomposers. Okay? The bacteria, the worms, the microorganisms. And again, at each of these levels, there's no graph for it, but there is energy lost every time something eats something else. So these plants, in its natural form, there's much more energy in this plant than is going to be able to be used by this bird or this mouse. Okay, so every time something eats something else, there is less energy available at that level. And so up here, you're usually going to have way fewer of these organisms than you are, say, plants or primary consumers, or whatever the case may be. And I mentioned this before, but we're talking about autotrophs versus heterotrophs right now. These are terms you should know. And again, an autotroph is something that creates its own food. In this case, this is an entire habitat that is based around what are called chemoautotrophs. Okay? And a chemoautotroph is using sugars that it's making from the energy from H2S, which is a chemical being released very, very deep at the bottom of the ocean here and at one of these geothermal vents. Okay? So most organisms or most autotrophs are creating energy are creating sugars from the sun. There are organisms here that are creating sugars using chemical energy being released from these volcanic regions. So I think the last topic I'm going to talk about in this lecture is actually the idea of biomagnification. And what biomagnification says is that if there are sort of low levels of a particular toxin or nutrient in the environment, that is going to get amplified every time you go up a trophic level. So this is nitrogen enrichment, and this is in a freshwater ecosystem. But the example that works a little bit better for me is mercury. So the reason that you can't eat a lot of oceanic fish is because there is a ton of mercury contamination in the ocean. And so what's happening there is the organisms that the fish are eating are picking up mercury in small levels. And then as the fish eat those, the mercury is accumulating within the fish itself. And so unlike energy that dissipates as you go up higher if you go up to higher trophic levels, mercury toxins accumulate. Okay, there's nothing there to dissipate that mercury, and it's residing in the tissues of the fish. And this is the idea of biomagnification. It says here, this chart shows PCB concentration. It's found at the various trophic levels in the Saginaw Bay ecosystem of Lake Huron. Notice the fish in the higher trophic levels accumulate more PCBs than at lower trophic levels. Okay, so there you have it. Next time, I'm going to start talking about biogeochemical cycling. So that's for the next lecture.